Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel Deep Code Vision. Today we will be talking about comments and docstrings in Python. So I am using Atom as my IDE. You can use any IDE you want. Now let's say I write a code to add two numbers. It's pretty simple, right? So for this particular code, even if you don't comment it, it's fine. But it's always a good practice to comment your codes so that anyone who is reading your code later on, or even yourself when you're reading a complicated code later on, it becomes easier for you to understand. And it it helps us debug your code let's say you have written 1,000 lines, 10,000 lines of code. Now you don't know what your first 100 line does, or your middle 200 line does. So it becomes difficult for you to debug. So it's better that you code along with your you comment your code along with your actual code. So I just, if I addition of two integers, that's what this code does, right? This part of code, or this snippet of code. Now this is the first integer, and this is the second integer, and this is the sum, and this is the code that prints the sum. That's it, right? So this becomes very easy for anyone to understand, even if they don't know what your code does, even they don't know what the code, the logic of the code or algorithm of the code does. You can just comment something which is relevant to that line of code, and it helps us understand, or helps you remember the code even. So now let's say, so that's all about what I'm going to talk about comments. Now it's a best practice to use a single line comment, and also, if a line of code you cannot explain that in a single line comment, it's better that you check your code to make it a little simple, or break down your code into two lines. So that's a good rule of thumb that I like to practice, so that I don't confuse or in the long run. Now that's, let's say, what are docstrings then? Now docstrings, first, how to define a docstring. Docstrings are uh, document strings. That's where the name comes from. It's extensively used in API documentations, and also your defining your function or your methods. So it's almost similar to a comment. One of the few differences are that it takes up space, that Python actually reads those part, whereas in comments, while your code is compiled, Python skips those part which are commented out. Another thing that is different is that docstrings, you can write multiple lines, and it is similar to what you called multiple line strings. Now what is the syntax? It's either triple quotes and end up with a triple quote, triple single quote, or you can also start with a triple double quotes and end with triple double quotes. So it's completely the same. Now let's say I want to docstring this, so I can write this program takes in uh, takes in two integers and calculates the sum. and calculates the sum and the difference. Let's say we want to do that also. Now once I end it, you you see that the color change. So it says it, thus it denotes that it's a string, but it's a doc string in this case. And now what I like to do is I would do this so that the first line says what these two does, and the second line says what the next line does, and the third line is difference, or let's say diff, and it's absolute. I don't want a negative value. Let's say absolute first sum minus second sum. Okay, and I print the difference as well. Okay, so that's about it. Now you will see that I told you that Python reads my docstring, but why is it that the output doesn't show anything about the docstring, and how do we rectify that? Now here, using the docstring here, it's kind of overkill, that you don't need it. Docstrings has a huge use in methods. Like if you define a method and then you want to say, or say to your anyone who is reading your code that, okay, this is my method and I this method does this. Let's say a simple multiplication. You want to declare that this multiplication function does these and these things. So that's where docstrings are really helpful. And if you define a, a docstring inside of method, and then you can actually access that docstring very easily. I'm going to show you that. So let's keep this part as it is. Let's take another file and let's save it as doc docstrings ex2.ui. Now let us define two functions. One, let's say I want to do a multiplication. So I define, if you're not familiar about how to define functions in Python, it's fine. We are not talking about function definitions, arguments, and all those things right now. Functions are methods, but in the later stages we will talk about it in detail. Now let's say it defines I define a multiplication function and it returns a value of the product. It's simple, right? Now let's define another function. I call it sqr, or square, and it returns a yeah. So these functions are pretty self-explanatory. Now let's say we have a complicated function. We take in some values, images, as array, numpy array, and then we do some sort of operations on them. We normalize them and all those things. It becomes difficult for you in the later part, when you are revisiting your code, to understand what you have done or what your method does. So let's say anyone who is reading your code, again, these doc strings and comments are to best practices when you are coding. Now if I define this as a doc string, so I write function takes two numbers, calculates their product, calculates and returns their product. Perfect. So that's what my function does, right? Similarly, this part, what it does is takes one number, one, let's say to be specific, I'm only talking about integers, integer number. Now it then integer number calculates its square and returns it. Calculate calculates and returns square. Okay, so that what my do function does. Now let's say I want to know what my function multiply function does or multi function does. Now one way to print your docstring is calling a method. This is double underscore, by the way. So if I run this, you see that the output shows that the function takes two integer numbers and calculates and returns their product. Probably a comma here. Yeah, okay. So you can print it like that, or another way you can call a help method on your particular function. So if you call a help method on your particular function, you will also find that it says it shows you the function, what arguments it takes, and it also shows you the function takes two integer numbers and calculates and returns their product. Perfect. Now let us call and see whether it works. uh, I mean, I hope so it works. It's quite easy, the functions that we have declared. So let's say we call into both the function and I store it in two variables. Because it is returning something, if you only call the function, it probably don't have an return variable, so it will show an error. Now if you only want to call the method or a function, uh, it's good practice to call it a method actually. So if you call this method, and if there is if you, instead of return, you would have written a print statement, it wouldn't need a variable to return the function, but you are saying to return that value, so that's why um, you need to declare a variable. Now let us run this okay, I need to print both of them, right? So print product and also print squared. Okay, now if I run this, it should show the two results, and also it should show you the help method called on multi, and also uh, the doc method that we have called it. Now one thing you might be wondering, what is this? Now this is a very interesting part, how Python reads any method or anything. This is one of the most important concepts in Python. We will not talk about this right now. It's quite advanced concept. Let's now I before some time, like a few minutes back, we were talking about API documentations and all. So it's quite interesting that Python can create an HTML page from all the doc strings it will show, and it creates a documentation for you. You don't have to do anything to create. You just want to um, call a module called PyDoc, and I'll show you how to do that. So for that, we need to do what we need to do is we need to go to command prompt. It's easier to do it in command prompt rather than here. So firstly, we need to go to my desktop. That's where my file is. Now, now what are we going to do is we will write this part of the code in here. So that's where my um, Python file lies. Wherever you have saved your Python file, go to that using cd and write Python. So this, what it does, it activates the Python part. And now PyDoc, that's the module, and this means to write, and we pass the file that I want to write my HTML page as. So that is docstrings underscore ex2. That's it. You don't need to specify your .py because it already is inside Python. So that's about it. Okay. Now if I press enter, it says that it shows all the outputs same as here, but it says another thing, that it has written a HTML docstrings dot ex2 dot html. Now where do I find this? Now if you go to your directory where you have saved your Python file, you will find a HTML file with the same name as your Python file. Now if you click on that, it will open on your default browser, and you'll probably be able to see what it does. Now this is how a HTML documentation would be if you call that PyDoc. Now it says it has two functions. One is your multi function, and it shows us the doc string. And similarly, you see there is a square function sqr, and it shows us what that function does. The doc string, it reads that doc string. Now what it does here is it also shows us two data. Because we call the function inside the program itself, it shows us two data. One is the product of 6 and the squared of 256, the result. So that's how you can create a docstring, HTML file for your docstring. You can show the docstrings. Now it becomes very helpful when you are trying to share your software. You try to share your code with someone. You can create a docstring, and you can do that. Now why I use the command line for this is because it's a little bit convenient. You could have written it here, you could have imported the module and run that module. It's fine, but it's convenient to do it in the uh, command line itself, just to make the code a little bit clearer. Now if I delete these two, let us comment calling the prd sorry the multi method, and here calling the sqr method, and similarly print the product and print the way, and displaying the doc string, calling help method to the multi function. You can also call the help method on your square function and see what happens, so you can do that itself and check it out. Now this is what uh, comments and doc strings are all about. Now one thing, make sure that you don't use doc strings unnecessarily because it takes up space. If you can do it with your comments, please do that. Doc strings, do reserve it for your um, functions, or sorry, the methods. It's uh, to tell yourself or your co-coders about what your method does. So do not use doc strings unnecessarily, use comments instead. Now another thing, a small thing actually, let's say what are the other uses of one of the other use of comments. Now one of the other use of comments is that you can debug your code use commenting out some of part of it. Now let's go back to the comments.py. Now let's say I don't want my difference uh, line, right? I can just comment it out. Now if I print this, it will show an error because it doesn't know the diff variable, right? So you can do this, you can uncomment it like that. I am using my control front slash to comment it out, comment any line of code, and you can select what line of codes you want to comment, and you can press control and front slash, and it should do the job. um, and so that's about it. Or yeah, yeah. So um, yeah, that's what. So that's all about comments and doc strings. Let me know if you have any doubts in the comments. If you like this video, please subscribe to my channel. It's a new channel, and let me know what other videos you want. um, I am planning to post videos every other day. I'll first cover with Python and R, one video on Python, one video on R, or let's see how it goes, and let me know. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next one.